Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you had good sessions. I'm sure you enjoyed lunch as well. Our first session this afternoon is a Newsmaker interview with someone who served as US Secretary of State and since early 2021 has been the US Presidential Envoy for Climate. 6 years ago, he signed the Paris Agreement with his 2-year-old granddaughter on his lap. He knows that she's old enough today to ask the tough questions that she and other children her age care so deeply about, the future of our planet. He knows this crisis is existential, and he made it his existence. Please welcome to the stage the US Presidential Envoy for Climate, Secretary of State, former Secretary of State and former Senator John Kerry, and Nick Clark, the environmental editor of Al Jazeera English, who will be conducting this interview.
Good afternoon, everybody. Great to be here. John Kerry, Presidential Envoy for Climate. Thank you for talking to Al Jazeera here at the Doha Forum. We'll get into the nitty-gritty of and the whys and wherefores of climate policy in just a second. But, Mr. Kerry, you know, I remember, I think it's 2014, the climate summit in Peru, in Lima. And I was walking along the corridors and I heard these refrains of happy birthday being sung by your team to you. And at that point, you were, if you'll forgive me for saying, you were 70 years old. And if we do the maths, a lot of people at this point...
Please don't.
A lot of people at this point would be enjoying a relaxed retirement. So what is it about this particular mission that's driving you on?
Well, Gita mentioned it. Grandchildren, children, and the fate of the planet. I mean, nothing less is at stake. And it's hard in the midst of Ukraine, where, let me just say very quickly, Putin is waging not just an illegal, unprovoked war, but an evil, horrendous war that is the worst thing I've seen. And I fought in a war, but it's the worst thing I've seen since I've seen clips of what happened in World War II. And it really rises to a level of bestiality and personal cravenness that all of us should be pushing back against in every way that we possibly know how. That said, we face another crisis, which is existential. And if it is existential, which I believe it is, and many people here, Mary Robbins and others, know it is, we are not yet responding globally in a way that manifests that we care that it is existential. So that's why I'm involved in this. I've been doing this since 1988, when we first heard scientist Jim Hansen testify to us in Congress that it was already happening. And I went to Rio with Al Gore and a whole bunch of other people, and we fought for an agreement. We had an agreement. It was voluntary. Nobody did anything. We went to Kyoto. We went to countless meetings, including Buenos Aires and Copenhagen, and finally Paris, where I had an opportunity to weigh in and have, I hope, some impact, and again in Glasgow. And in Glasgow, we proved, through all the things that we did, getting 65% of global GDP committed to real plans that could achieve 1.5 degree limit, which Fatih Birol in the IEA, I was just in Paris with him, and they have reaffirmed that if everybody does what they promised to do in Paris, we could actually hold the Earth's temperature to 1.8 degrees by 2050. The problem is we're not doing everything we promised to do, and we're still back in 2-point-something degrees, and that is absolutely catastrophic. So we must manage, we human beings must manage two crises at the same time.
Right.
Ukraine and climate.
And the crisis of the climate is being made more difficult now by Ukraine.
Well,
everything's being reshaped, isn't it?
In some ways, Nick, but not sure about every way.
I was just going to say, because you already alluded to it, we're well behind the mark already on where we need to be with climate. Do you worry that the ongoing conflict is going to set us back further?
I worry But as I was just saying, I'm not convinced that we know the answer to that question yet. It's clear that in Europe, they have decided to double down on the single strongest thing you can do about Putin's stranglehold on fuel for Europe, which is get off the fuel. And so Belgium has doubled down. They're going to be dealing with keeping a nuclear plant open longer than they anticipated. France is doubling down on nuclear. Germany has decided to speed up the transition on renewables. Denmark is speeding up. Netherlands is speeding up. And already in the United States, we're seeing a great deal more effort being put into moving away from the gas, and we have a goal of a 50% reduction. So here's where we stand. The scientists, first of all, we're not doing what we're doing because a leader of a country has said we have to do this. President Biden, myself, others. We're doing this because the best scientists in the world, repeatedly over 30 years, and now more dramatically, are telling us unequivocally that we have X number of years, it happens to now be down to 8, approximately, to make the critical decisions and implement them to avoid the worst consequences of the climate crisis. So let me emphasize to everybody, that is not to avoid the crisis. It's to avoid the worst consequences of the crisis. And that's only avoidable if we cut emissions by 45% between now and 2030. So we have, as I said, 65% of global GDP. There are 20 countries, make it simple, there are 20 countries that equal 80% of all emissions. Those 20 countries happen to be the 20 largest economies of the world. They are also members of a thing called MEF, the Major Economies Forum. And 12 of those countries are on a track to be able to hold on to 1.5 degrees. The problem is there are 8 others, and then more close to them underneath it, who are not. And you know who they are. They're the largest economies: China, Russia, India, Indonesia, Saudi Arabia, Mexico, Brazil, South Africa. South Africa, Indonesia, India, and Mexico have made major decisions to rapidly try to transition. And we are working very closely with each of them. We actually worked with them prior to Glasgow. So they've raised their ambition. South Africa, we have $8.5 billion to try to help South Africa begin to get off of coal. Indonesia has made a commitment to get off of coal, but they need technology and money. Mexico has made a fascinating decision through President Lopez Obrador, where we're working with them to actually try to get 50% renewables deployed in the next 8 to 10 years, get them to tap into their geothermal, and they have terrific wind and solar in the south of the country. So then you have India. India has made a commitment to deploy 450 gigawatts of renewable, and we're working as a partner with India to try to help them do that. Again, they need technology and they need finance. And the key here is getting that. Now, in Glasgow, many of you may remember the so-called GFANs, the Glasgow Financial Asset Managers, and many and other efforts. Mark Carney worked hard on this, and others. We've pulled together well over $100 trillion of investable finance that's ready to commit to this transition. But that's not giveaway money. It's not concessionary. And it will look for a return on the investment, as it should, and particularly in the case of pension funds and other things. So what we, the global community, need to do now is make sure there are bankable projects that you can bring to the table that will deploy those trillions of dollars. And why is that critical? Because everything suggests, more than suggests, it compels that we must invest in this transition. And the UN report on finance says there is a deficit of between $2.5 and $4.5 trillion per year for the next 30 years. No government in the world has the money to do that. So the only way we solve this problem, my friends, is the importance of the Doha Forum. It's the importance of every meeting we have now. The only way we get to where we have to go to prevent trillions of dollars of damage that far exceeds the money we need to invest, and every analysis shows that, the only way we get there is by getting the private sector fully invested in that transition, which means we need to be more creative. We need to have blended finance. We've met with Jeff Bezos, Mike Bloomberg, Rockefeller Foundation, others. We need to release some money as concessionary money to use as leverage to get additional funds committed based on assuming a certain amount of risk, reducing that first risk, and making it tenable for those investable funds to make the decision to deploy. That's how we win.
Right. It's a clarion call, but not everybody is listening. That's the case, isn't it? I mean,
you know, actually, I think a lot of people are listening. I think they're not responding.
Okay, all right, not responding. But if we come back to Ukraine again, I'm not going to get into US policy on Ukraine because it's not your remit. But on the climate, that is. Because there are many oil majors, many companies, oil majors included, who are now re-examining their climate pledges. I mean, look at Shell and the Cambo oil field in the North Sea. And this latest agreement, just in the last couple of days, between the US and the EU to supply, for the United States to supply LPG to the EU, they're going to need to build infrastructure. And as we know, infrastructure projects last decades. It's going in the wrong direction.
Well, it depends on the decisions that get made, and we've had this discussion very clearly in Washington in the last days with respect to this EU decision and beyond it. So let me share with you what I believe is unvarnished truth. Some may not like it, but this is the only way we get there. Last year, we succeeded in getting China to say they will not fund any coal plants externally. And the world is moving away from coal, not just because people in climate work like myself are saying coal's the dirtiest fuel and we don't abate it and you can't do it, but because the marketplace is deciding it no longer is that viable. They haven't decided that, obviously, on gas, certainly oil. But I've talked, I mean, I had a meeting with the energy minister here today, and we talked about this, and he understands completely and is committed to making sure that the emissions from the burning of gas and or oil are captured. Now, we have about an 8-year period here where we can begin to move to put in place the carbon capture, carbon pricing for those who accept that. We have to move to...
Yeah, both of those are controversial, though, aren't they? A lot of people don't go there.
Carbon capture is not, I don't think that's as controversial. The question is...
as a solution, as a potential solution.
Well, yeah, because it costs money to deploy the infrastructure to do it. But if it comes to the point where you do that or you spend trillions of dollars more to build seawalls that won't last very long and to try to adapt and prevent floods from destroying farms and growing land all around the world. And by the way, there's another problem that compounds this, which this region really understands, and that's called extreme heat. We are seeing, yesterday, folks, just to give you a heads up, in Arctic yesterday and the day before and the day before, it was 70 degrees Fahrenheit, 30 degrees centigrade above normal. In the Antarctic, it was 100 degrees Fahrenheit above normal, and that's what, 40 degrees or so plus. I talked to a scientist at the Potsdam Institute. Many of you may have heard of him, Johan Rockström. He's a terrific scientist. He's one of the most respected people in the world on this subject. And I asked him the other day, what are you most afraid of right now in terms of the evidence? And he said, afraid that we have passed 3 tipping points from which there's no reversibility. And he said, that's the danger. This is irreversible. In the Arctic, in the Antarctic, and the coral reefs. Now, you see the temperatures, you can make your own judgment as a person who wants to I hope, utilize the precautionary principle of governing, which would suggest that since last year was the hottest year in recorded history, with the hottest day in recorded history, the hottest month in recorded history, and was preceded by the second hottest decade in history, which was preceded by the third hottest decade in history, you would think, as public people, we begin to say, whoa, that may be a trend. Maybe something's happening we should respond to, which is added on to by the fact that the scientists are all telling us, if you don't respond to these things, it's going to get worse. 10 million people a year die from air pollution, which is principally greenhouse gases. Those greenhouse gases go into the ocean. 90% of the excess heat of the planet goes into the ocean. And the chemistry of the ocean is now changing faster than it has in our recorded memory. Faster than it has, according to scientific understanding, in millions of years. And the acidification of the ocean, which comes from the CO2 that then rains into the ocean, is changing the chemistry even further, which will affect fish stocks, affect mangrove growth, and all the other buffers that we have. So we're literally on a track to kill ourselves over a period of time, other than those who have the most money in the world. People who have a certain amount of money will probably, not all people are going to suddenly feel the same effects. But that's another problem for the planet. Because in Africa, you could have the implosion of the capacity of Africa to produce food because of the extreme heat and the lack of water. And that is an absolute scientific prediction. It's not a John Kerry pull-it-out-of-the-sky statement. So what happens then? You have tens of millions of refugees wandering the planet, knocking on the door of places that are livable. And we've already seen what happens with mass migration as a result of conflict. So I believe, I don't want to sound, this is not a triteism, but we're playing with fire. We're seeing fire consuming huge proportions of countries, and we've got to change it. It's changeable. That's what's exciting. I'm sorry to go on, but this is winnable. That's what's so frustrating. And I was in California last week. I went out there because I wanted to see how winnable it is. I was at Stanford. I went to the Google X. I met with, thanks to Mark Benioff at Salesforce, we got about 15 really exciting startups. I saw a battery that gets 100 hours. I saw a new lithium process that will not require us to all have a lithium mine or access. We'll be able to continue to build electric vehicles. I saw carbon capture direct that creates a product, including, say, sustainable aviation fuel. There are a host of these technologies which, if we put enough money and effort into them in these next years, I'm really convinced we're going to win this battle, but we got to do it and get more of it.
I note we're running out of time. Just one final question. Here in the Middle East, we have nations built on the petrodollar. How should these nations be planning for the future?
Diversifying, thinking not only about being an oil and gas company, but be an energy company. And they are doing that. I mean, I know that Saudi Arabia is thinking about a massive hydrogen capacity fueled by solar that will drive the electrolyzers, that can produce the green hydrogen, that can then, this is doable, folks. In fact, we're looking at the potential, not the potential, the reality. It'll happen. The only issue is, will it happen fast enough? And what's going to happen is there will be new methodologies that are found to deal with the problems, which some people haven't wanted to deal with. Take heavy industry, steel, aluminum, shipping. Shipping, if it were a country, would be the 8th largest emitter on the planet. So we got Maersk to step up in Glasgow and join something called the First Movers Coalition. And we have a host of companies, 37 of them now, including Amazon, Boeing, Delta, Salesforce, Apple, Volvo, Maersk. Volvo has decided that 10% of the steel they purchase in order to make their cars will now be green, no matter what. And they're doing it. Maersk has said the next 8 ships we build are going to be carbon-free. I mean, this is what's happening. Lafarge Holcim is producing green cement. And people are buying the cement not just because it's green, but because it's clean, it's better cement than the cement they've had previously. So things like that are evolving that I think are profoundly impactful. And secondly, as I said with the energy minister here, it's not the gas per se that is the problem. It's not the oil per se that is the problem. It's the byproduct of the way we choose to use them. So if you can come up with the way to use them and capture those emissions and do something with them, you may have a virtuous future that is not going to be absent that product. So that's the transition we're in. This is the biggest market. The energy market is the largest market the world has ever known. Think of that. In Massachusetts, which I was privileged to represent in the Senate for 28 years, including Harvard and MIT, and as a Yale man, I hesitate to mention Harvard, but we do. But the huge, 136 colleges and universities, they're all pushing forward with an understanding that this transition is dependent on technology and transition. We had an incredible upsurge in 1990s because of personal telephones and desktops, right? Technology. Millions of millionaires were created, a lot of millionaires, a lot of money was made, but it was only a $1 trillion market with about 1 billion users. We're looking at a multi-trillion-dollar already existing market in the double digits somewhere, with 4.5 to 5 billion users already, rising to 9 to 10 billion in the next 30 years. And you can debate how great that is, but that's what's going to happen. If that's a marketplace that will demand clean energy, and therefore you're going to see an enormous amount of growth here, huge development, huge investment. I already see, I think there's about $1 trillion now of venture capital that has moved in the last couple of years into these sectors. It's already making a difference, but you can't bet on it, which means you must be deploying now as much of the existing technology as we have, which is what the IEA says we should do, which means solar, wind, geothermal, hydro, nuclear, a lot of things. If we were to deploy more of it more rapidly, we win this battle.
Right. We'll have to leave it there. Time is up. John Kerry, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much indeed, Secretary Kerry. Thank you, Nick, for this insightful conversation, which of course continues to raise that perennial nagging question. How do you get countries to get off the fuel, as Secretary Kerry says, to get off the coal, when, let's face it, we also face a new reality, in many respects a paradox.